Right, welcome everyone. I'm Akash. I'm the host of Airtime Webinars, which is a bi-weekly series of discussions with research and product leaders about the nitty-gritty details of building products. Today, I'll be talking to Nesrine about the Delight Grid and how it can create emotional attachment with your users. Now, what you need to know about Nesrine is that she's the Career Lab Director for the Product Management track of ESSEC Global MBA. And she has also worked on products like Google Meet or Spotify's video feature, thereby bringing video podcasts to millions of users, many of you potentially. Nesrin, it's a pleasure to have you here. I'm delighted that you accepted my invitation. And I'd like to pass the mic to you. And I think the best thing would be to learn a little bit about your background and all the amazing products and things that you've worked on.
Hi, Akash. Thanks for having me. I'm also excited and delighted being here and share at least some of the insights I have acquired throughout my career. So maybe to present myself, I call myself nowadays, because I have the liberty to call myself whatever I want since I left the corporate world, a product educator. Because most of what I do nowadays is very much related to educating around best practices of building products. So I'm acting both on the academic side, as you described, like teaching the next leader generation as part of the MBA here in Paris, but also a lot within the corporate and company trainings as well. So I offer corporate trainings and trainings to around product management. But before I moved into this educator role, most of my career has been into product management, like the dirty hands way. I started about like 15 years ago, where I picked the video product manager role as part of Skype in Sweden. So when I joined Skype, it was only 101, by the way, just to give you more or less how things were back that time. So my team and I introduced features like group video call on mobiles and enhanced the video communication. And then I moved from Skype to Spotify, where I acted as a media experience PM. What I mean by media experience PM is like, how can we improve the media experience while enjoying Spotify independently of your network, your device, your country. So that was a big piece of my career. And then COVID hit, and I wanted to be back to the video conferencing world. So I joined Google Meet right when the pandemic hit Europe, by the way, when we were all asked to stay home. And it was a quite special time, because that was the time where we introduced specific features to that time, like, for example, background replace, noise cancellation, centering, and all of the features that came with that new behavior or this new way of consuming video conferencing. So these are more or less the three companies I worked on. So I worked on Skype, Spotify, Google Meet, and then my last baby was Google Chrome. I worked in Google Chrome here in Paris because I decided to be back to Paris after spending 9 years in Sweden. And that's more or less my product experience.
Yeah, it's sheer coincidence, but last week on a flight towards Lisbon, I listened to a podcast with Nicholas. Nicholas Zenström. He would probably kill me for the pronunciation. He's the founder of Skype. He has this amazing story that he sold his company, Skype, for $2.5 billion to eBay. A couple of years later, he bought it back for a fraction of the cost, and then he sold it again for more than $8 billion to Microsoft.
Yes. It's an interesting story, and every product, by the way, holds an interesting story. And talking about Skype particularly, I mean, I'm emotionally connected to Skype, both professionally, but also personally, like for being someone who moved from a place to another and having left my home country quite early. Skype was not just a communication tool. It was a way to stay connected, to feel belonged, and not feel like leftover. Because you remember, like during the early days, having international calls was just out of budget. And when Skype came, that was like a wow effect. And now I just recently heard, and it was like, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, I heard that Microsoft is not going to allow Skype for consumer anymore. So actually, Skype will ring for the very last time on May 5th. So in about a month from now. It's a quite nostalgic and like emotional moment for me.
I bet. And Skype definitely changed the lives of millions. A quick anecdote here. In 2003, I was an exchange student in Canada in the middle of Alberta in a small town. And I remember having these little scratch cards, you know that, for international calls. And I had money to call my parents like once a month. And I think it's unimaginable these days. People get angry if they don't get connected within 1 second. That was a different world.
Absolutely.
All right, Nesrine, I think we could talk about those days for hours and hours, but the audience, or I invited the audience with the promise that we'll dig into product delight. I think the perfect entry point to that would be to dwell a little bit on what is product delight in your definition, and why is it so important that you chose to dedicate a lot of your time and focus to product delight?
Yes. So, in addition to being a product manager, during most of my career, I always wanted to be on stage and speak about different product related topics on conferences and events and meetups. And I get that as a habit. Like I almost had like a talk every year or something during the last um, 15 years. And one day, one conference organizer asked me quite specific and challenging question. He actually asked me, "Hey Nasreen, since you have been in these large, successful and globally used, large successful companies and globally used products, could you tell us like if there is any common trend or something in common you've noticed from being an insider that shaped the success of these products?" And honestly, since I never thought about that, I found it quite challenging, but I wanted to do the exercise. So I thought about the question. I realized that yes, there is a common thread. There is something in common between these three companies. And it's the fact that these three companies invest heavily in creating emotional connection between users and products. It means that it's not only about creating the functionality and solving the problem, it's about going beyond and exceed expectation by anticipating need and create something additional than functional, which I call the emotional connection. So, product delight, as you just said, is the concept of creating products that go beyond functional aspects and create emotional connection between users and the product. We can, of course, dig deeper, but that's more or less the high
Yeah.
level definition for me.
I'd love to understand one aspect here, because what you describe is also the way I would describe very successful brands, like take Patagonia, no, like
Yes.
touchable, real, tangible brands that build tangible products, and that they've been doing that. Like take Coca-Cola, for instance, as just carbonated, sugary water with like a black flavor. Sorry for all the Coca-Cola fans out there. But my point is, it's been around in the world that we need to add on top of functional benefits. There's like an experience and an emotional benefits that need to be added to products. Why isn't that straightforward for
Yes.
software companies?
So you said it quite well. Actually, the concept of emotional connection is not new, but depend on the area. For example, for marketing, emotional connection is such a well covered and well known area that like this emotional marketing, Coca-Cola, for instance, for example, they
Yeah,
play around a lot with like Coca-Cola is not just a drink; it's a way of sharing and having fun with others. It's also very much present among designers because emotional design is a concept that is very well covered by literature, by books, and a lot of materials. The problem is, and that's what I realized over the last couple of years, is this concept is not very well covered among business and product managers. So that creates a gap in
I see.
communication. So designers are talking about emotion, marketers are talking about emotion. But boom, in the middle, these people who are actually building the product, like the product managers deciding for what to build, and the engineers who are actually doing it, they are not onboarded in that topic. And that, of course, creates a gap and create like a miscommunication and, of course, lose the flow and the benefit of that area. So my mission or my role nowadays is to evangelize concept of delight among business and product managers in order to demystify, explain what it is, and also create a common ground so that people can speak the same language toward the same benefit.
Yeah, you used the word evangelize, and I think that's also the case for the Kano model, which evangelizes delight, right? It there's different categories that it puts certain features in. So for the sake of holistic understanding of where product delight is in the big picture, would you mind giving a quick tour of the Kano model and how your definition fits into that?
I'm a big fan, by the way, by the Kano model, so thanks for highlighting that. So Kano, just to give a quick introduction for those who are probably not familiar with what it is, it's a framework, and it's a great model that allows categorizing features into, by the way, 5 categories. We can talk about these 5 categories, depending on the level of satisfaction the product brings to the users. So the very first category is a must-have, meaning that if the feature is there, the satisfaction is not necessarily high. However, if it's not there, the satisfaction is low. So think about going to a hotel and you can't find hot water. You will be extremely disappointed. However, if there is hot water, you will not probably cheer and be happy about having hot water. It's expected, right? The second category is performance, meaning that the more you have it, the more satisfied users are. And the less you have it, the less satisfied users are. Back to the hotel example, maybe think about the mattress size or the mattress quality or thickness. Because the bigger the mattress, the more comfortable the mattress is, the more satisfied you get, right? That's the second category. The third category is the delighters, which is very much related to our topic nowadays, which is if it's there, people get extremely satisfied. But if it's not there, people will not probably even notice. You see what I mean? For example, if we go back to the hotel example, if you check in and I offer you a voucher for a spa or for a bar consumption, for example, you can get delighted, you're happy, you're satisfied because you did not expect that. However, if I'm not offering that to you, you may probably not even notice it. So these are the delighters. The 2 additional categories are very less known, but one of them is called the reverse. Reverse means if you have it, users are not satisfied, and if you don't have it, users are satisfied. So it's a quite interesting case.
Interesting.
It actually exists quite a lot, and I'm going to give you an example, by the way.
Cockroaches in hotels.
Yeah, maybe want to do something funny, and they add the queue for check-in and end up to be a quite long
there you
queue
go.
or something. Yeah, but for example, I worked on Chrome, and in Chrome, one of the reverse feature is, could you guess?
In Chrome?
Yes.
No, I don't know.
Ads. The more ads you have in the browser, less satisfied are users, right? I mean, users want less ads. But it doesn't necessarily mean that if it's a reverse, then you don't have to build it. Sometimes you have to build it for financial reason or for legal reason or for security reason. So sometimes it's necessary to be there, but it's there because for a reason. Just be aware that it's the reverse, so you are mindful about that. The last category is called indifferent. Actually, indifferent is there or not there. It doesn't make any change to the user satisfaction. Think about maybe you move to the cloud or it's something technical you're building to the product and does not imply any change to the user satisfaction. So these are the 5 categories of the Kano models.
I love your hotel example, and it reminded me Back in the days before I had kids, I listened to a lot more podcasts, and there was this podcast which described a business hotel chain in the U.S. The name escapes me, but when you check into hotels and you're traveling because of business reasons, there's a very straightforward and standardized process that you go through everywhere. And what this hotel chain did is, upon check-in, they give you a hot, freshly baked cookie. Now it broke this standardized chain. You something happened to you that was out of the ordinary, and on top of that, it's just such a small thing. And this was there. And now that you explained what a delighter is, I realized it's an offline delighter in a
Yes.
hotel check-in process. So
Yeah.
it can be applied in software as well as in the real world out there.
Absolutely. By the way, the best example I usually use to explain Kano is the Happy Meal. You know, the Happy Meal by McDonald's, as you have kids here, you're probably onboarded
Yeah.
into that. I mean, my kids got hooked into Happy Meal, even if I completely disagree. So Happy Meal must have are what? The food. I mean, the nuggets, the burger, the food is a must have. The performance is what? Is probably the quantity of the fries, the quantity of the meat, the quality of the meat. These are performances. The more you have, the better you feel, or the more satisfied you are. But the delighters are the book, the toys, the design of the box, the partnership. They recently did a partnership with Minecraft, for example. So all these are delighters. And you see, McDonald's could easily improve their performance. They could probably add more food or improve the quality or the quantity, but they deliberately invest in delight and in innovating into the toy and the partnership, because that actually brings the client. That's what users are sometimes there for.
Yeah, yeah. Now let's talk about this delight in more detail, because having been a startup founder for years, I had a regular discussion with my technical co-founder on what we're going to build in the next 2 weeks, in the next quarter, and then we also used the Kano model. And to be frank, it wasn't always straightforward for us to define what is a performance feature and what is a delighter, like something I may label as a delighter, but once I built it, it turns out nobody really cared that much.
Mm.
What's your way of like making sure and verifying that, okay, this is really a delighter, and
Yes,
I'm not building something that I believe is a delighter but actually is just an indifferent
I see.
or a reverse at worst.
Actually, what people don't know, so Camel is quite popular and people know how to use it, or how at least to classify features among the different categories. But Kano came with a second tool that is probably less known and less used. The second tool is exactly all about how to categorize features into these 5 categories. So
Hmm.
the second tool is all about, let's imagine you, Akash, have a feature. You're thinking about a feature and you're wondering, is this a performance? Is this a delighter? Or probably it's even a must have. What you will do is you will go to a couple of users and you will ask them the following question. How would you feel about having that feature? That's what we call the functional question. And
Hmm.
then you ask them the second question, which is, how would you feel about not having that feature? It's simply as those two questions. We call them functional question and dysfunctional question. So functional is how do you feel about having it? Dysfunctional is how do you feel about not having it? And actually users only have choices between 5 answers options. They can
Hmm.
say, I like it, I expect it, I can live with it, and actually 4 answers, and I dislike it. So for both functional and dysfunctional, users can say, I like it, I expect it, I can live with it, or I don't like it. And actually the combination of the answers to the functional and dysfunctional questions give you if the feature is a delighter, a performance, or a must-have. So think about, for example, a user would say, "I like when the feature is there, But then when they are answering about how do you feel about not having it, they would say, I can live with it, or I expect it's not there. Then it's a delight. You see what I mean?
Yeah. I have a question. I'm gonna put it straight on the screen here from Sarah about when is a good time to ask that question. And she's asking about like at the end of the usability test as an example.
So I did this test quite often during my PM time, and it's very important to ask this question quite early before even having a high fidelity prototype. So we usually do users interview at different levels, and when you have the concept validation, and then you have an idea that you want probably to prototype, you bring a low fidelity prototype, show to the users, and then ask them, hey, how do you feel about having this feature into the product that you're using daily? And how do you feel about not having it in the product that you're feeling daily? So it's not when the feature is ready or about to be developed, but it's rather important to have this insight quite early in the process, because actually what people don't know, and that's something that happened to me, is sometimes we had a backlog and we thought that the feature is a delighter, but when we did the user interview in quite early process, by the way, we realized that out of the results, the feature is a must-have. Actually,
Wow.
most people said that they expect it's there and they were almost angry about the fact that it's not there. So it's important sometimes to do this exercise quite early before even, because if it's a delighter, there is a high temptation that you down prioritize it, you bring it later. But if you do that early on, it happens sometimes that the feature turns out to be a must have, and then you may change your prioritization accordingly. By the way, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that Kano is a prioritization tool. It's not a prioritization tool. It's just a categorization tool.
I'd like to cover a few more points with you, Nesrine, and let's go back to your functional and emotional motivators. I think you've also published a number of articles about that, and you have a very specific idea of what these functional and emotional motivators are. And my question to you have two parts. One, can you share with us what are these motivators? And then two, are they universal? Are they the same motivators for every company, or does each company need to find their own ones?
Okay, very good question. So I used Kano quite a lot in my product time, but then I realized that it's lacking one aspect. Or I mean, it's a great, by the way, introductory tool or awareness tool, but it's lacking one element. And what is actually lacking is the fact that solutions are not directly related to the real user's need. So yes, you have satisfactions, availability, and categories, but you cannot really connect a feature to what exact need is it solving for. So that's why I put my researcher hat back. So I started my career as a researcher, by the way. I did a PhD on signal processing and then moved to product management, but that's just the past. And 2 years ago, I put my researcher hat back and I wanted to come up with a new way of building the light using Kano as a foundation, of course. And I said, like, in order to create this emotional connection, it's extremely important to be aware of what motivates users to use a certain product. So users actually use a product for a reason, and this reason is not random. It's usually driven by a desire or what I call motivators. So motivators are the why behind every usage of a product. By the way, just for the sake of explanation here, when we are building a product, it's very important to start by segmenting our users. This is what we call the user segmentation. And there are different levels of segmentation. There is the demographic segmentation, meaning that you segment them based on their gender, their location, blah, blah, blah. And the second segmentation is called the behavioral segmentation, meaning that you segment users based on how they use the product, that they use it daily, weekly, or That's the second type. And the third type of segmentation is called the motivational segmentation, which means that you have to segment your users or split your users based on what motivates them to use your product. Some would use it for a reason that could not be exactly the same as for others. And it's really important to understand that there are two types of motivators. There are what we call the functional motivators. For example, I open Spotify to listen to music, or I go to Google Flight to book a flight, or I can text a message. These are functional motivators. These are goal oriented. However, the second type of motivators, which is extremely powerful in this topic, is the emotional motivators, meaning that people sometimes go to a product not only to fulfill a goal, but also to fulfill some emotion or to feel good. So, for example, I open Spotify sometimes to feel less lonely. Does it happen to you sometimes? Like you don't know exactly what do you want to listen to, but it's all about looking for company, or maybe you want to feel more productive. So sometimes these are also, or you want to feel connected to something as well. So the concept of motivators is all about interviewing your users as much as you can, as close as possible, in order to list what motivates them on a functional level. And these are easy. And by the way, most people are really good at identifying functional motivators. But at the same time, try to understand what could also motivate them at the emotional level. Why do they go to the product, or what kind of emotion are they looking to fulfill while using the product? So that answers your first question. The second question you asked about is, are they universal? Actually, they are not even the same for the same product. So you asked, are they the same among different products? Even within the same product, they are different from a person to another. Remember, we said the motivational segmentation? I mean, you have different segments because users use a product for different reasons and they have different
Yeah.
emotion to fulfill. So it's really important to cover different personas and different segments and list them in order to make sure that you're not satisfying certain group and completely dissatisfying others.
I see. And in your methodology, you then you create a matrix, right? A matrix of functional and emotional motivators. And then what you hash out is some sort of a map where you have three categories of delighters. Can you explain to
Yes,
that? Because now we're getting to the heart of the matter, and this is something that I
yes.
really like to dissect and understand in more detail. What are these areas, and how do they relate to each other?
Very good. So that was the very first step. And it's, by the way, an extremely important step, which is identifying the functional and the emotional motivators. Why it matters and why it's important? Because the next step is to place them in what I call the delight grid. So the delight grid, think about it as a matrix or even a table to simplify it. And on the top, horizontally, you will place at every column the emotional motivators that you listed. For example, feeling connected or feeling present or self-expression or whatever emotionally related motivators. On the vertical side and every row, you will place the functional motivators. And then you have a matrix that you have to fill in. How would you fill in your matrix or the delight grid? You go to your backlog. So imagine you have a roadmap or a backlog with a list of features. You take every feature, you look at it and say, which emotional motivators does it solve? And which functional motivators does it solve? And you place it in a matrix based on what motivators does it solve. If your feature solves only for a functional motivator, meaning that it doesn't evoke any emotion, it doesn't solve for any emotion motivators, then we call that category low delight. It's a very important category, by the way, because it's about making sure that your product is functioning well, but it does not create any emotional connection. If your feature, you look at it and you think that it's only solving for an emotional motivator, there's nothing functional in it, then it's called surface delight. The best example I could share with you is Wrapped. Like Spotify Wrapped at the end of the year does not provide any function, right? I mean, it it is all about feeling proud, being able to share your taste with your community. So it's only surface delight here. If you look at your feature and you would see that it is solving for both an emotional motivator and a functional motivator, then it belongs to the third category that I call deep delight. Again, best example I could share with you is probably Discover Weekly. Discover Weekly allows you to discover new content, which is probably a functional motivator, but at the same time, it allows you to have self-expression and feel like a personalized taste as well, which is more emotional in that case. So these are the three categories. All you have to do is to look at your backlog and one by one, place them integrate based on what motivator does it solve. If you realize that you have plenty of features does not solve for any of these motivators, it means that your features are not solving for real users' need, right? That's the very first realization you can have. And the beauty of this matrix compared to Kano, and that's why I told you it's a complementary tool to Kano, is that now you can see real connection between the features that you're building and the motivators
Yeah.
it is solving for.
So what's the game plan? When I plot it and I see a bunch of low, let's say I see a bunch of low delight and surface delight, is my goal to move them somehow to deep delight, or should I have like a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 split? What's the how do I go
Yes.
about?
Very good question, because by the way, as I told you earlier, it's not because it's called low delight that we should minimize it. That's why I came with the 50-40-10 model.
Mhm.
So the 50-40-10 means that in the ideal world, you want to have 50% of your features within the low delight, which is completely expected. And that's maybe something that people are surprised to hear, because they maybe expect me to say much lower percentage to low delight. But no, don't get me wrong. It's important to have at least 50% of your backlog about improving functionality. The 40% goes to deep delight, meaning that, again, I want to enhance functionality, but in a much smarter way, because I want to inject a bit of emotion into it, like similar to Discover
Yeah.
Weekly, for example. And the surface delight is only 10%, because we don't want to make our product so destructive. And it's not about Easter eggs and confettis. I don't want to have a confetti effect. The confetti effect should only come for a reason and to celebrate a certain particular case. So the 50-40-10 model is a guidance to allow you hopefully achieve a good balance between low delight, deep delight, and surface delight. Now, you asked about what's the aim. The very first goal is a visualization tool. Like, it's about being aware of your level of delight. Because most of the time I do this exercise with the people I'm coaching nowadays, but we just realize that 100% of the backlog is low delight. So that's by itself a good awareness exercise. Now, what I usually do is I try to take those low delight and see how can I enhance the experience of those low delight feature in a way that I can bring them a little bit closer to the deep delight, meaning that can I add some personalization? Can I add some seasonality? Can I add some celebration moment? Can I add some fun in a way that it connects not only with the functional part, but also with the emotional part?
Yeah, yeah. Listen, I have a bunch of questions, but I also see the audience being very active, and I want to make sure that they also get the bandwidth and get to pick your mind. So I'm gonna throw some questions in your direction, and I'll let you catch them and answer them. And we're gonna start with Sarah, just reflecting on our latest discussion point and. Asking about the backlog and using your methodology for roadmap planning.
Yes. So the question is probably, what is the best time to do this exercise? So the best way to do this exercise is to do it in a continuous way, because you remember this identification of the motivators. It's something that happens in the discovery phase. So it's very important to do that in a continuous way and continuously update your motivator list. Now, when you move to the planning side and you already have some ideas that you already brainstormed on or created out of the team exercise, then it's important before even put it in the backlog, because yes, maybe I've been too fast talking about backlog here. It's important to do this exercise of the light grid before going to the planning in order to assess how my next roadmap will look like. And by the way, I had the habit when I worked at Google to put colors. So, for example, features that are low delight would be gray, and features that are deep delight are pink, and features that are surface delight are orange. Like, this is just like for me, in order to highlight, is my roadmap too gray? Or is it like a bit more pinkish and somehow flourishing roadmap? So yes, I highly recommend doing this exercise continuously and particularly right before the roadmap planning.
A heat map for the roadmap. I have another question, which is asking about the Kano model, that in case it is not used as a prioritization tool, how would you, or how can it be incorporated in decision making and development processes?
Yes. So the reason why it's not a prioritization, so if the question is about Kano, it's not a prioritization tool, then yes, it's not, because if you're saying it's a prioritization tool, you know what happened? You will be saying, okay, I will prioritize must have, and then I will prioritize performance, and then I will put P3 as delighters. And if you do so, what happens? You will never reach the lighters. We have so many must-haves in our backlog. Believe me, like even in companies like Spotify and Google, I've been working on, like the backlog is packed with must-have and performances. And if we use Kano as a prioritization tool, we will have great product. Believe me, that's the only result you can get. So the best way or the best mindset to have is to always look at your roadmap or whatever pie you're using to prioritize and make sure that you're having a nice bouquet. A nice bouquet, of course, with a maximum number of must have, some performance, and always make space for at least a little bit the lighter. And that it's a mindset. It's not something that you need guidance or you need number, and it's making sure that you're reminding yourself that your roadmap is not only about must have. So that's what I did, for example, at Spotify. I've been sitting on a backlog, as I told you, full of must have. And I remember like we had plenty of features competing on the must have level. But at the same time, we managed to ship feature like Canvas. So Canvas, for example, is this feature when you open Spotify, you have a mini clip, very mini clip, like 3 or 4 seconds, looping video. You see like a small clip of the track. This is a pure delighter that we injected in a very busy backlog because we wanted to have a product that has a personality and has a brand that please.
Yeah. Thank you. I want to go back to Sarah's point. I want to take us back about 30 minutes in our discussion when we were talking about the hotel example. And Sarah was she wrote that question as I was telling the story about the little hot freshly baked cookie that you get upon checking in. She's asking how and you can do endless amount of research and never think about giving that cookie to customers. But once you start giving it to them, you realize it's a delighter. How do you solve that conundrum?
Yes, it's not easy if you don't do the homework properly. I'm sorry to say that. I mean, the only way, think about the best gift you can get. I'm getting even farther away from software now. Think about the best gift you get. Is it the one that you get randomly, or is it the one that you get in a thoughtful way? Someone that knows exactly what your taste is, what you value. I mean, I remember when I left my very first company, I've got a very simple and symbolic like gift that I still remember very well nowadays. It's a kit for creating macaron, for baking macaron. And that resonated so well with me because I remember I spoke about me trying and failing so many times in creating macarons. Like I love baking, but I never managed to create macaron. And my colleague or my ex-colleague thought about offering me an entire kit of how to succeed or hopefully succeed in the macaron on my side. So it's exactly the same thing for software and users. So if you get that habit of talking to them in a more empathetic way and ask them questions like in a way that you get most of the information and insight from them, not from you showing them the feature, how do you feel about this feature, but rather tell me about the last time you used the product. How did you feel about using the product? Tell me about cases where you felt frustrated while using the product. Why is that? I mean, if you get that habit of being curious and get interested in understanding the real journey of the users, then you will build that insight and that relationship or that trust that will lead you to create these cookies. For example, I've been traveling with my two kids and my husband last year, and as soon as we check it in, we get to the room and we found two teddy bears in the room. I mean, that was so thoughtful because they knew that we were traveling with two kids. The kids got super excited, by the way, by the two teddy bear. We also felt like, oh, this is a nice, and we felt valued by that gift. So it's about trying to understand who are your users, what do they value, so that I can offer them the right thing. It's not a random gift. Your product should not be a random gift. It should be a thoughtful and very well studied gift.
Yeah, I love this example of teddy bear, and I can also share a personal example. My son had an operation in January, and I was already in the room, and I saw that the nurses put his little teddy bear right next to him. So when he opens his eyes, he's gonna see the teddy bear straight away. And I thought to myself, like, oh my God, they thought about that. and and this is, I think this is the kind of feeling, and obviously it's a hospital, and your child is not the setting that you want to experience.
Yeah.
But even then, I know that I had this like a feeling of warmth going through the body, that somebody thought about that. So I think this is, if you can spot this these moments in your life, I think that's a good guiding point,
Yeah.
what kind of experience your customers can go through if you find that little warm cookie or the teddy bear on the bed.
That's a great example. I know people value examples, and I have plenty of examples maybe to share because I remember part of the question that you posted was about how is that related to software? Because we see a lot of examples outside of software, and actually there are a lot of examples in software if we get just curious to know them. Uh, if I wanna get back to a little bit of the definition of delight. I mentioned it's about emotional connection, and how do we achieve emotional connection? There are two pillars to achieve this emotional connection. The first one is to exceed expectation, and the second is to anticipate the need. And actually, Akash, you highlighted that in the example of the hospital. How did they even thought about that? This is about anticipating the need. I mean, before you even ask the nurse, can you put the teddy bear? She thought about that herself. And I'm going to share with you one example that for a product that I use a lot, but I did not use a lot until like I really realized that feature, which is Revolut. So Revolut is fintech, of course, product. For years, my husband has been like always convincing me to open a Revolut. He's like in love with his Revolut bank. It's like, how come like one person is in love with his Revolut account? And it happens that we traveled outside of Europe. And as soon as we arrived to that country, I realized that my SIM card did not work in that country. And if I want to have an international call, I had to pay like roaming, which is like amazingly high.
Yeah.
And I looked at my husband and I realized that he was able to get an eSIM right from his Revolut app. I was like, what? How come you can have an eSIM from a bank? Like, how come?
Yeah.
And then I realized that Revolut thought about most of their users are international profiles, people who travels a lot. It's all about like exchanging currencies. And since you're traveling a lot, one of the needs that you can have is the need for communication. And so actually, if you open the Revolut app, you can have the possibility to purchase an eSIM for a very low fare, by the way. And those are the kind of moment that you realize that I should have had it. Like,
So then they caught you.
then they caught. Yeah, then they caught me.
There you go. There you go. Amazing. Nesrine, thanks so much for the wisdom, for the stories and the examples. Nesrine, I'll be following your journey and your newsletter, and I hope to have you back sometime soon and continue this super interesting and exciting discussion.
Same here. Thanks for having me. And for those curious to know more, actually, there is a book coming. The book is called
there we
Product
go.
Delight. It is coming hopefully in probably a few weeks. I'm aiming for end of May. So it's cooking. It's cooking.
Cool. It's very close. Like I know, like writing a book can take a couple of years. So when you say it's coming in the next weeks, then it means that you're doing the final touches.
Yeah.
Or am I putting pressure on you?
It's good to put pressure at this level. I mean, I really wanted to get it out.
All right. Well, I'm crossing my fingers. It's definitely going to be an insightful read. So stay tuned, everyone. And with that, I wish everyone a very nice end of the day, beginning of the day, depending on where you're tuning in from. All the best.